Be the Vibe Radio, Season 6, Episode 9.
Wow, your face, really?
Yes, he's obsessed.
Well, obsessed. Like you have to show them to me. Come on, show them to me. You have to show them to
Okay.
me. Let me see.
Hello, and welcome to Be the Vibe Radio, where we have real life discussions about real life experiences. Be the Vibe Radio is an educational podcast that promotes liberation through spirituality. I am your host, Latoya Thurman. Hello, peace and blessings. Welcome to another episode of Be the Vibe Radio with your favorite hostess, Latoya Thurman, aka Chrysalis Sun. It is January 7th, 2025. I can't believe it's a new year already. I don't know, every year since the pandemic, it's just been like this time has been speeding by crazy. But this is officially the first segment of Be the Vibe Radio of the new year. So yay about that. So every year, those who've been following me for a while, you know that around this time from, late winter going into the new year, I take a break. I take a hiatus where I close my books. I don't take appointments. I don't do any consultations. I don't do readings. And I take the time for self-care. I meditate. I tend to my altars, my bovedas. I rest. I relax. I journal, I detox, and always during that time, very much needed, especially over the last few years because Spirit has been working me a lot. I've been doing a lot of work for my community, and I definitely need that rest time. But I'm really glad I honored that this year because I came out of my hiatus into the new year into chaos. Like from January 1st on, and I think today's like officially a week into the new year, it has been like back to back to back like crazy shit, right? I received a lot of downloads that I will share in this episode and in future episodes that I'm planning on recording. In addition to that, I am happy to announce that I am resurrecting my YouTube channel. Okay, so I have not been on YouTube for several years. I know a lot of you who are on this platform found me originally on YouTube and Facebook. Y'all know that my old school self, I struggle with social media. I can't do multiple. I'm not wired to maintain multiple social medias at once. So usually when I pick up one social media, I drop another. And I don't know, YouTube over the last several years has been really weird for me. The energy's been off. And so I kind of had stopped posting videos to YouTube. I haven't even, once I post this episode on there, this will be the first video that I put up on YouTube in several years, right? But Spirit is on me to revamp and start my YouTube channel back up. As much as I'm funny acting towards YouTube, I will say that platform has been very consistent, and it has been very good in allowing me to get my message out to the world in an uncensored way. So between that platform and my podcast, my personal business website, it has been the only places where I've been able to really kind of reach people and share my message unfiltered, right? So from this episode on, I will be posting the video versions of my podcast episodes on YouTube. And then, of course, the audio versions will be on the podcast, right? So that's my announcements. Happy New Year. I hope everybody is sane. I hope everybody is doing well, considered. So what are we talking about today? Today we are talking about how to deepen your spiritual practice. I feel like this is a very necessary message in order to start the new year with, especially considering where I see things going on a spiritual and global level, in addition to downloads and dreams that I've been having. So, the title, what we're talking about today, is how to deepen your spiritual practice, with the sidebar of what it means to be a spiritualist in the year of our Lord 2025, right? So, get your tea, get your coffee, get your pen and paper, light your incense. I got my glass of water, and pull up, sit down. Because I want us to talk. Let's talk about ways in which we can deepen our spiritual practice. And to me, what I see is what it means to be a spiritualist in this new time, this new era that we are bringing in. So why this topic, right? Because it's 2025, bitch. Like, and I say that because clearly things are changing. Things are changing on so many different levels, on a micro and a macro level, on the physical plane, on the spiritual plane, internally, personally, and globally, communally, politically, socially, economically. It's things are changing, and I have my notes because you guys know that all the Virgo in my chart, I have to have all my episodes with notes. But basically, what I wrote down was that things are changing, and we cannot do things the same anymore. Like, that's clear. Spirits, our ancestors, are calling for us to change our trajectory and change up how we are living our lives, how we are interacting with our communities, how we are um, dealing with people on multiple levels. They're also calling us for us to change how we are moving forward with our spiritual practices, right? A lot of the things that used to be relevant are no longer relevant. The things that used to work no longer work, or they need to be done differently, or they need to be tweaked, or this is a year for change, right? And so a lot of that change has to do with up leveling how you were moving about spiritually. Side note, if you hear a little like clackety clack noise in the background, that is my turtle, Ruby Jean. She's excited that I'm in here recording. So if you hear her swimming around, that's my turtle. So, but yeah, so we are changing. Things are changing. We can't continue to do things the same, right? It's funny because, you know, for those of you who don't know, who are catching me for the first time, either on YouTube or on this podcast episode, I am an initiated priestess of Yemaya in the Lukumi tradition. I was crowned 4 years ago. I am an espiritista. I'm a medium. I speak to the dead. I do a lot of work with ancestors and people's spirit guides. And I also have other practices as well that I am a part of, spiritually. And with all of my practices, it's been consistent messages, right? Arisha has come down and said these things. The spirits and Misas, our spirit guides, the dead have come down and said these same things. And what they're saying is that we really, really, really have to get into practices and do things that are meaningful and that are actually going to evolve us and make real impactful positive change, right? In addition to all of like my ATR stuff, and with me being a person who practices ancestor veneration, and I'm very much about maintaining my ancestors traditions, I still go to church, right? I still go to church. And it's interesting because I love the church that I go to. I don't go regularly, but I go when I'm called. The messages are great. The pastor's a great pastor. But I'm noticing a decline in the attendance of people going to church, right? A lot of people are leaving the church for a lot of obvious reasons that I definitely know I don't need to go into. Because I know if you're probably on my platform listening to my podcast, or you're on any of my social medias, it's because you're a spiritualist and you don't fuck with the church, right? Most people who are in these practices don't. And it's a lot for a lot of the same reasons. So I don't have to get into that. And it's actually unfortunate because though there are some nuggets and some valuable things that you can pull out of going to church or going to a organized religious institution, they're losing their relevancy, right? And so it's they're not holding the same weight like they used to. They're not they're not impacting people the way they used to, right? And what I've taken away from that is the fact that a lot of these religious institutions have lost the plot. They've lost the mission. They are got sidetracked by whatever else, either the money, the tithing, the titles, the hierarchy, the being in front of people and being over people and whatever the case may be, right? A lot of these churches have lost the original mission as to why they're even in existence and what they are meant to do for the community. And I take that as an example that, yes, that's Christian church, but that could very well end up being the case for any one of these spiritual practices that we are a part of, or any of these spiritual communities that we're a part of. And I'm very much a pattern recognition type of person, so it's easy for me to kind of spot like where things are going, right? Because I actually see it similar things going on in ATRs. I see similar things going on within like the eclectic witch community, the black spiritual hotep community. It's just like there's a lot of things that are happening, and it's twofold, right? It's a reflection of what's going on with each individual that's a part of these communities, and then what it manifests as a collective, right? So my way of fixing that, or presenting things that can be done to fix that, is to start with your individual practice, right? And start with, again, deepening that practice. Okay, so when I speak about deepening your spiritual practice and really what it means to be a spiritualist in this year of our Lord 2025, it needs to be revolutionary, right? Because we're in a revolution. We're in a spiritual warfare, whether people want to realize it or not, okay? What's going on with these countries, with these groups that are fighting, with these countries that are fighting, it's just a reflection of what's going on spiritually, right? The spiritual realm is going through the same thing. It's reflecting in our society. It's reflecting with the people, right? We are in a revolution. Like, don't make no mistakes about that, okay? So our spiritual practice needs to be revolutionary. And honestly, those of us who practice indigenous uh practices, like tribal ancestral bloodline practices, that in itself is revolutionary, because that's us coming out of what we've been taught, what we've been conditioned, um and what we grew up doing and seeking, through Christian, especially, those of us who are, people of color, black folks specifically. That's us coming out of that, and deprogramming ourselves and actively seeking out the practices of our ancestors, the practices that, empowered us and gave us power, back then, right? So that in itself is revolutionary. Making the choice to come out of that, traditional, conditioned form of spirituality and religion, and seeking out something more authentic to self. That in itself is revolutionary, but it needs to go deeper than that, right? It needs to be revolutionary and not performative. Okay. Um our spirituality needs to be impactful. I cannot tell you how long ago I stopped doing these spiritual retreats, because it was like, we would get together, it would be these sister circles, or these ancestor retreats and things like that. And I would get invited to these events. I would get invited to be a speaker. And you would go, it would be like for maybe a day, a weekend, whatever, and it would be all feel good and all, whatever in the moment. But then as soon as people dispersed and went home, they were kind of back to their spiritual struggles or their personal struggles. Like they weren't given anything tangible that they could take home and really use to improve their lives, right? And so I kind of stopped wanting it to be a part of that, because it's just like, yeah, I can go and be a facilitator, I can get paid, whatever, to do these retreats, but it just felt empty when I would see the same retreats with the same topics and the same people coming every year. And then in between, from year to year, in between that time, these people weren't getting, people who attended these retreats weren't getting any better, right? So that's when I talk about whatever we do in our spiritual practice needs to be impactful. And I'm not even speaking to those of us who, okay, let me backtrack. I'm not only speaking to those of us who do spiritual work for the community. I'm talking about just our own individual practices, right? I am known for saying that for me, I don't care what you practice as long as one, it doesn't harm others, and two, it improves your life and makes you a better person. Okay. Christianity for me, if it was the only thing that I was practicing, it at the time when I was a Christian, it didn't make me a better person and it didn't impact my life, right? But I've seen other people who are Christians, and whatever that energy did, it did something for them. It made them better people, it made them more kind and compassionate. It made them want to help others. It made them, it molded them in the form of true Christ consciousness, right? So it worked for them. And I'm like, okay, great, you're a Christian, it works for you. It didn't work for me, but me making Ocha and doing, spiritismo and getting into my ancestral practices and ancestor veneration, that provided me the growth and the maturity and the development that I needed, right? So that's what I mean by saying it needs to be impactful, right? There has to be, whatever you do spiritually needs to have a real change, within you and within your lifestyle, make your life better, not worse. And I'm probably going to do another episode where I talk about the dangers of practice, of being in practices and doing things in certain spiritual practices that make your life worse, right? Cause upheaval in your life. So that's another conversation for another day. But yes, it needs to be impactful. It needs to have depth and meaning. Okay, like don't just give food to your ancestors just because you are told that you need to have an ancestor altar and that's what you do every week. Don't just go to the river and give offerings to Oshun just because it's the thing to do and everybody's a daughter of Oshun all of a sudden. You know what I mean? Like you need to have a real relationship, a real depth, real meaning to what you're doing. When you give your food to your ancestors, is it just random food, or is it the ancestors that you've connected with them and it's their favorite foods? When you go to give your offerings to the river, are you communing with the river? Are you honoring the river? Are you, is it just an act, or is there a meaning behind it? You go to the river because you have a lot of spirits, water spirits in your spiritual court, and you want to honor them. And that's what's causing you to go to the river. Are you going because you had a legitimate reading from a priest and they're saying, hey, go give this stuff to the river, and you're following that advice? Like that's what I mean when I saying allowed to have depth and meaning. Or are you going to the river because you saw a TikTok of somebody giving sunflowers to the river and now you want to go do that, right? So yes, our practices need to have depth and meaning. They need to push things forward, and they need to promote positive change. And because of what I see going on in the world right now with all of the chaos, the violence, the fear, the division, this is more important than anything, right? I am, uh, 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 in these ATRs, I am a priest, and I'm very much about gatekeeping. I'm very much about things. If you're going to do things in these practices, doing them the right way. But I'm not about to sit there and fight with other people in these practices. I'm actually not about to fight with anybody because there's enough fighting going on as it is, right? So, fighting is a waste of time. It's a distraction, and it it takes away from the message, right? If there's drama and mess around your message and what you're trying to do, people fixate on the drama and the mess. They actually don't even hear the message, right? The message goes out the window. So, whatever you do needs to push things forward. It needs to promote positive change, and then that goes into my next point is that it needs to be evolutionary. Okay, you need to grow. You need to grow your environment, and you need to well for one we need to evolve within these practices. um we need our environment, our families, those of us who we get involved in these practices with us, our relationships with people need to evolve. There needs to just be some type of change, right? There's a lot of people that I actually stopped. So last year, a year before, my Instagram got my original Instagram got um, banned off IG, and I was like at almost 10,000 followers, right? And it took me about 6 months to even get back on Instagram, and I started my personal Instagram, back over. And when I did that, I actually, looked at some people that I used to follow because I was going to follow them again, but then I don't know, something that break off Instagram and then me returning, something shifted in myself. So when I was looking at these people that I used to follow, um, I don't know, I wasn't moved by these people because I'm like, why are you still talking about the same thing that you were talking about 6 months ago when I got banned? So a lot of people, I just was like, okay, yeah, you're still talking about the same thing that you're talking about last year, 4 years ago, 10 years ago. Yeah, I'm good. And even with me, a lot of my content has changed drastically over the years, which is why I'm actually getting back on YouTube, because for my content now, YouTube is a better platform for it, and my podcast. So yes, what you do within your spiritual practice needs to evolve you. Um, it needs to evolve your spirituality, your mental state, your maturity, your emotional state, all of that. So why this episode, right? Like why are we talking about this? Like what inspired me to run with this topic? Because social media, I blame this on social media. Social media really has done a number on how we as a society views spirituality, right? So when I first got on social media, when I first got on social media, it was really Instagram, and I was just chronicling my own journey. It wasn't even focused on my spiritual journey. It was just like I was going through healing. I was, getting my health. Yoga. I was on a weight loss journey. I was traveling. I was doing lots of poetry. I was art modeling. So a lot of my earlier social media focus was just like my day to day life, artsy, hippie, wander type shit, right? And then when I moved here to Atlanta, I kind of was getting a little bit more into my spiritual stuff because, and mostly holistic health, because that's actually the roots of my foundation is holistic health. So I had got Reiki certified. I, was doing herbalism and all of that. Even outside of just the root work and the hoodoo, I hadn't even really dived into that like that at the time. But at that time, and we're talking 2012-ish, maybe up until about 2015, spirituality it was still taboo. Like being a tarot reader, doing astrology. Well, astrology was a little bit more accepted. But like tarot readers and, Reiki practitioners and, all of the alternative medicine, the crystal girlies, like that, people weren't really like following that like that. It was kind of like a hush hush thing, something that people would look at you weird. If you were talking about it, people would come up to you privately and want to get readings and things like that. So that was like literally 10 years ago, and things have changed a lot. Like when I first got on social media, people weren't as open about their spiritual practices. They weren't showing their altars, they weren't doing live readings. Like, so to see the change of spirituality go from something that was very like private and personal to it being like trending on all matters of social media, even getting into um marketing and advertising. Now you're seeing these companies talking about Mercury retrograde and just these things, right? And so because of the shift of it within like what how it's displayed and how it's shown and the accessibility that people have to viewing other people's spiritual practices, it has really kind of skewed how people view spirituality. Um, for one, people don't understand that there's a difference between being a spiritual influencer and a spiritualist that just happens to be on social media, right? Spiritual influencers are people that aren't really spiritualists in their day-to-day practice. They just get on social media and they sell spirituality, right? Either through their products and things that they offer that may or may not be legit, or through them amassing larger followers that they can monetize, right? Particularly on TikTok. So a lot of the things that these spiritualists, these big name spiritualists, offer and sell and present is not the real deal, right? So there's that. A lot of spirituality that you see on social media is very much about aesthetics and gimmicks, and I'm probably sure I don't have to get into details about that because you see it, you see people's the way they dress up, the way that they show the way they beautify their altars, the way that they make their spell work all pretty, even down to how they present and sell their spell results. Like I see a lot of people who do group services or they do spell works for people, and then they report like these results that I'm like, I don't think that went exactly that way. I think that spell took a little bit more work than you're wanting to admit to people. I don't think that spell worked as quickly as you think. Like, it's just certain things as a spiritualist I know of that looking at how the people present spirituality and practices, I'm like, yeah, no, that's not how that works. That's not how that went. There's a lack of honesty and transparency within that, right? Then I mean, and then the court, and then to go into further details of that, or to expand on that, the information that people on social media give in regards to spirituality is just either outright wrong or it doesn't apply, right? um or it's contradictory, right? And this is because our spiritual practices are not a one size fits all, even down to the common spirits that we honor. For example, I'm a devotee of Santa Muerte. I have a specific relationship with Santa Muerte where that dictates how she wants her altar, the colors of her altar, the things she wants on her altar, where she wants it, and the types of works and offerings and prayers and things that I do with Santa Muerte. Then you have other people who are on social media that are also devotees of Santa Muerte, and all of that looks very different for them based off of their own individual relationship with Santa Muerte. So people will get on here and say, oh, well, Santa Muerte doesn't do this and she doesn't take this and she only likes this. And it's like, maybe for you, but for me or this other person who has a real relationship with Santa Muerte, that's a little different. So that's just an example, Some people are like, I'll use Arisha for another example. Some people are like, oh, you only give offerings to Yemaya at the river, you only give Yemaya offerings at the ocean, and vice versa. It's incorrect, right? Not true. It's both. If you are an Ashesha practitioner whose roots are out of Nigeria, Yemaya there is a river essence. So they give their offerings, they do their stuff to Yemaya at the river. Whereas those of us who are in the diaspora, from my including me myself, who is an initiate of Yemaya, I give my offerings at the ocean because for us, our Yemaya, our history of her, the stories of her, the odus of her are connected to the ocean, right? And then there's some people who are like, well, you don't, when you're on social media, oh, you don't record spirit possession. And then some people, then you see some videos of people recording spirit possession, and they're like, oh, you're not supposed to do it. In certain cultures, in certain countries, they are perfectly okay with recording and posting spirit possession, and it's real possession. I know parts of Haiti sometimes, some Lua are okay with being, well, what I've seen. Because as a person who mounts and who's seen mountings and who's seen and experienced spirit possession, I can look at videos and tell who's really in spirit possession and who's not, right? I can tell the real from the fake, right? So as long as the spirit itself is okay with being recorded, it's going to come down and allow itself to be recorded. Spirits that don't want to be recorded don't mount or don't put themselves in the view or in the space of a camera, right? Whereas, but then in our tradition here with our particular spiritual house, we don't record. I don't record Orisha mounting. We don't record misas, muertos coming down. So, again, people get on social media and say this is this one thing for everybody that practices this thing, and it's not always the case, or it's just flat out misinformation, right? And this is why I say it's important to deepen your spiritual practice, because for one, when you deepen your spiritual practice, then you deepen your discernment, and then you're able to recognize when things are apply to you or when it's just bullshit, right? The other thing to keep in mind too is that when you deepen your practice, then you are in such communion with your spirit guides, your ancestors, your deities that you serve, that they are instructing you on how they want to be worked and served, and you go with that. You're confident with that. It doesn't matter what other people say, unless they're priests and it's in an ATR, and that's a whole other conversation, right? But even within that, our within our Elay, my godparent, he's very much about tradition. He's very much about doing things about according to protocol. But at the end of the day, his rule is if Orisha says this thing, and that's what it is. If Orisha comes down and they say it, if it comes down in OB, if it comes down in Dilogun, that's just what it is. That's their mouthpiece, and that's their final say. Um, so yes, the information can be wrong. It could not apply. Another example is all these things that were coming up about the New Year's, right? Some people were like, you do this and you have to do this and you have to do this and you have to do this on New Year's. And it was like every time I looked on social media, it was like this new thing that we had to do for New Year's Eve. And I was like, and then if you don't do it, if you don't cook the black eyed peas and the collard greens, you're not going to have prosperity and this and this and that. And mind you, I've never cooked. I've never done the black eyed peas and the greens tradition for New Year's Eve. I actually follow whatever downloads that I get from my spirits on advice of what to do specifically to prepare for the energy of that particular year, because each year's energy is different. So black eyed peas and the collard greens can work for one year, and then the next year you might have to do something else. The messages that were coming through for this year were about cleaning. It was about clearing and cleaning. Orisha was coming down saying it. Spirit guides were coming down and saying it. I was already feeling it. I wasn't the only one. So instead of spending New Year's Eve cooking the black eyed peas and collard greens, I spent New Year's Eve deep cleaning my house, cleaning all my altars, refreshing all of my Orishas, deep cleaning my store, refreshing my altars at the store. That's what I did to bring in prosperity into the new year, right? So yes, there were all these advices and things online, but what applied to me was what the messages I was getting directly from my own spirits. And this is again why it's important to deepen your spiritual practice, so that way you can have that very tailored like message, or very specific, very relevant. That's the word. Very relevant message for what you need to be doing according to your situation and what you got, right? Um, my other issue with social media is that it creates this very microwaved spirituality. People think that things are supposed to happen fast. They don't happen fast, right? When I first started, I mean, even now it's okay. Let me go in sequence. So when I first started meditating, I started with Buddhism, I started with meditating. I did that for a couple of years before I started to see how it was opening up my intuition and my psychic abilities, right? And then once I moved to Atlanta and I started practicing ancestor veneration, I was doing that for a good year. Before I started having dreams and things that were leading me towards my path in Orisha worship and with my other ancestral religious spiritual practices, right? And then when I was doing misas and I was developing as an spiritista and as a medium, um, well, that I will be honest and say that kicked in pretty fast because I was already a natural medium. Like I've been having prophetic dreaming and I've been able to see the dead in spirit since I was a child. So that actually happened pretty quick. But when, as a person who hosts misas and who's watched people come consistently to my misas, there's people like after a year, after 2 years of coming to my misas or going to other misas that I start to see like their mediumship hone in, right? I've been working my Boveda for the last, I want to say 6 years, 5, 6 years. And it took 2 years before I started having my main spirit guide come down in possession. It took me maybe a year after that before I started getting regularly possessed by other spirits. And I'm still 6 years in learning about certain spirits, some that are more that are less vocal than others, and how to work with them, how to, what they need and all of that, right? And this is the practice I've been in for 6 years. So, my spell work, like my oils, it's taken me, I mean, my oils from the beginning have always had some results, but it's taken me at least a good 5 years, 4 years to perfect the potency of my conjure oils. It has taken me a good 3 years to figure out which type of spell work I'm best at. There's times where I'll do a spell and it pops immediately, and sometimes I'll do a spell and it takes a year. So it's consistency and practice. But when you get on social media, a lot of these people sell the idea that you do something and things manifest quickly, and it's like some things require more work, more energy, more time, more skill, more knowledge than others, right? And then what I also don't like is that this ends up fostering unrealistic expectations and insecurities. People feel like, well, my mediumship isn't as good as this person. I can't read tarot as well as this person online, or I'm not able to hear spirits the way this person can, or when I put this offering to Saint Expedite, it took me 2 weeks to get my results, where this other person got their results within 24 hours. And it just creates like this really unrealistic idea of spirituality, because really, as a spiritualist, you, especially someone who's doing root work or magic work, spell work, your ability to make things pop off is contingent upon practice, knowledge, and your relationship with your spirit guides and the spirits that help you facilitate these workings, right? And if you don't have all three cultivated, you're going to struggle in that area, right? And I will say, like, the more that I deepen my practice and I get right in all those areas, the easier and faster it is for me to make a spell work, you know? And even with that, there's still some spells that I just don't do because they don't work, because my spirits just don't like helping me or me doing those types of spells, right? So, all these people who get on social media and they act like, they read a book 6 months ago, now they're an expert, and now they're manifesting all this money and these lovers and this fame and all this. No, it's bullshit. It's bullshit. And it's very likely that about 90% of these people, these spiritual influencers, don't have any real substantial spiritual practice outside of what they present in their 1 minute, 2 minute clips on social media. So moving forward, with the way the world is and is going, and what, based off of what I've downloaded, the messages I've gotten, the dreams that I've had, what does our spirituality look like, you know, going into 2025 and beyond, right? Because we are clearly on a trajectory of change that we can't turn back from. And it's happening whether we want to participate in the change or not. So it's best that we actually participate, right? And be intentional, and be in charge of our practice, right? To facilitate our practice, facilitate our spirituality so that our spirituality doesn't facilitate us, because that's something else I've seen a lot of. It's just, I've been seeing a lot of psychotic breaks because people are not grounded, they're not present, they're not rooted in what their spiritual experience is, right? So our spirituality needs to be deeply personal. Okay, it needs to be personal in the sense that it is ours. It is ours first before it's anybody else's, right? So like I said, I am initiated in things. I own a botanica in Atlanta. I run a spiritual house in Ely. I have godchildren. I provide readings, services, root work, cleanses for the community. There's a lot of things that I do in my spiritual practice that I share with the community, and then there's a lot of aspects of my spiritual practice that I keep private that are just for myself, right? I am scratched in palo. That palo medicine is strictly for me. I don't share anything about palo with the public. I don't do palo work for the public. I have things that I do, practices that I do within the Haitian voodoo realm, practice that I don't share. I don't really talk about. I don't post those altars that work, those offerings that I do with my lua, because it's a very ancestral practice, that is specifically for me to heal and work through things with my own ancestral bloodline, right? I have a lot of like earth nature practices that I do out at rivers, at trees, at mountains, things like that, that I don't talk about, right? So yes, for those of us who are meant to share our gifts with the world, we do, but then we also have to have things that are just for ourselves, right? So our practice needs to be deeply personal, and tailored to our own ancestral bloodline, what we need as our own selves to fulfill our own destiny, and whatnot. Our practices need to be relevant, authentic, and aligned, right? They need to be relevant in the sense that they are connected to our ancestors and our spirit guides. Our people need to be able to recognize what we're doing. If our people can't recognize what we're doing, there's no point. They're not going to support it. You're not going to get very much. You're not going to get very far because it's not supported from your ancestors or from your spirit guides, right? It's not. You can't just be doing things just because you see somebody else doing them, right? Because it's a trend. Spirituality, it don't work like that. Again, it needs to be authentic. It needs to be whatever you're doing and why you're doing it needs to be for the right reasons, and it needs to be aligned. Again, I see a lot of people that want to run to Ifa or, Risha practices. And when I zone in or hone in on their court, their spirit guides, their ancestors, I'm like, that you may want to look at these, you may want to explore or be open to these other practices, because you can do that if you want to, but I'm not seeing that in your spiritual court. You know what I'm saying? Or you have a lot of people that have connections to practices that have been lost, and their purpose is to reintroduce those practices into their bloodline, but they're not doing it because they're so focused on what the trend is that they're actually actively ignoring um their actual mission, right? This is where I get a lot of people that come to me who are called to some things that don't fit in the traditional boxes of other practices, right? And then they're confused or they feel like they're doing something wrong. But then when I explore that a bit, I'm like, no, like this is a practice, this is something that was done at some point, and then your ancestors either didn't pass it on, they didn't teach it, and it got lost, but they're calling for it to be reintroduced. But because it's in your DNA, but it's the ancestral memory is still not unlocked. And so it's confusing, and then you can't go to anyone and ask questions because there's not even any more elders in these practices, right? So that's when I say that it has to be authentic and it has to be aligned. And we have to, with that being said, we have to be willing to go against the grain and go against the box. Now, I'm not saying to invent things, because that's also a slippery slope. We don't want to go so far left that we're just being eclectic and we're making things up. But we want to be open to getting into practices that may not be mainstream, but that fit our own, like our bloodline and what our ancestors are connected to, right? So there's a very fine line that we have to walk with that, right? And in that same sense, what we do as spiritualists now more than ever has to be guided, right? This goes back into the making shit up, right? Like, and this is another reason why I I'm having issues with social media and what I see, because like I see people getting on social media and literally making shit up and just saying anything and then presenting it to the masses like it's truth, and it's not, right? These people don't have guidance. Like, and when I say guidance, I mean the guidance of your ancestors, through your ancestor veneration. I mean the guidance of your spirit guides, through regular work with them, the guidance of an elder, whether that elder is a grandmother or great grandmother that used to do hoodoo, or an uncle that used to be a root worker, or who used to, make his pot liquor to cure colds. You know what I'm saying? Or that cousin that is a farmer that knows how to work herbs and work the earth and get things to, and knows the nature of plants, like, or you have a family Bible that's passed down that's got recipes and prayers and different things, and your family tree, whether it's you are a part of a spiritual house of a practice, and you're with, and you have a elder, either godfather, godmother, etc., and they're guiding you, elders in those traditions, whether it is an actual spiritual mentor, someone that you're taking classes with, someone that's guiding you through certain things. Like, this is not the time to be an eclectic practitioner, a lone practitioner, because it's really getting a lot of people messed up, right? And it really is pulling us off of a lot of people off of, a lot of us off of our path, because, yes, you lean in on your intuition and you listen to your spirit guides, but sometimes our own interpretation of that could be a little biased. And then that's when we need to go to an elder and be like, hey, I got this message, I had this dream, I had this this insight to make this particular thing or do this spell. What is your take on this? What is your interpretation of this dream? What is your experience with these types of herbs that I got list to do whatever with, right? That guidance helps to fine tune our skills, right? Yes, I've been in this journey for a very long time. Yes, I did a lot on my own in the beginning. I did not have a mentor for my first, let me see, at least my first 4 or 5 years, other than the mentors that I had for my meditation and my Buddhism. I studied and did I spent a lot of time with Buddhist monks, and that's how I learned that. But as far as like my other practices, I was on my own, and it was books, it was articles, it was practice, it was trial and error until I got to Atlanta and I started actually meeting other people who were in these practices that could guide me, right? And so there's a lot of things I got wrong in the beginning. And honestly, it delayed a lot of my progression because I was winging it, right? So when we're not guided, we end up winging it. And it makes us miss a lot of opportunities. It makes us make a lot of really great mistakes. We can really turn our lives upside down. So, and this is because I'm a part of a community-based practice. Like, you can't do anything on your own. There's only so much you can do on your own before you reach a ceiling and you can't go past it. And that's if you reach the ceiling. Because there's a lot of people doing things on their own that I don't know where they're going. Some of these people need a mentor ASAP, right? So our practice needs to be guided, and then that gets into the topic of it. We need to be in community, period. This is because mainly these are community-based practices. Any indigenous practice we do is community-based because indigenous people they're communal, right? But on a world level, what's going on with the world? The world is very violent and very fearful of the other right now. And because of that, a lot of people are targeting marginalized groups and the other group, right? And so your biggest form of protection would be to be in the middle of a community that can hold space for you and that can be a buffer against who might want to single you out, who may want to attack you for your religious, your spiritual beliefs, etc. Right? So that's another reason why community is very important, and that with us practicing, we need to be within community. Plus, the more we gather as groups to do ceremonies, to do drummings, to worship, whatever, to do misas, etc., to do spell work, to do ritual, the more energy that's gathered, the more power that comes together, right? The less work the individual has to do because you've got a collective containing, like building and containing that energy, right? So yes, what we need to do in 2025 moving forward as spiritualists need to be communal. They need to be bloodline, ancestral focused. Okay. This is where you get into, again, people practicing things that they ain't got no business practicing because their ancestors don't know shit about it, right? For example, with my ancestors, with my spiritual court, I have ancestors that obviously were Christian, Kojic, Baptist. And then I have some ancestors, some spirit guides that are Catholic. So I that's why I still go to church. That's why I go to mass. From what I know so far, I don't have any ancestors that were Muslim. So me going to, to me placing a Quran on the Boveda, me going, to an Islamic prayer, call to prayer, that might move me. That might do something for me a little bit, but my spirit guides, my ancestors are not going to know anything about that, right? My magical system is hoodoo. It is root work. It's conjure, specifically low country, black belt, southern hoodoo. My people are Alabama, Mississippi, a little bit of Louisiana, but most of my root working ancestors are coming from my side of the family that is Alabama and Mississippi. So my conjure is going to be specific to that region. Me trying to, and then that's why there's certain things that I make and certain things I don't make. I don't make Van oil because that's more of a Louisiana based conjure oil, and it doesn't. When I make it, it doesn't pop for me. But when I go people who are, Louisiana based conjurers, or even like Appalachia based conjurers, and they make that oil, it works, it pops. You know what I'm saying? there's a lot. I have a lot of Native American spirits and ancestry as well, and so a lot of the Native American practices, like building earth mounds, going to sweat lodges, and Native American drumming and using Native American drums, that my spirits respond to that. You know what I'm saying? And so that when I say that, our practices need to be bloodline and ancestral focused, that's what I mean. And that also includes picking up practices that we might be opposed to because we have some issues with who is in our court. For example, my partner, who's Durham from Durham, blackity black, parents are black, ancestors are black, all of that. He's got Italian spirits in his spiritual court. He's got an Irish spirit in his spiritual court. So there's a little Catholicism there. There is a little bit of, Italian folk magic that he can work or that he works that pops for him because of that. You know what I'm saying? Whereas if I were to try to, get into some Italian folk magic, because my spirits are not going to know nothing about that, right? So I know it's a long-winded explanation of what I mean by that, but I stress that because this is why you see people doing practices that don't work for them because it has nothing to do with their background. This is why when I first got into witchcraft and I was trying to do spells out of a Wiccan book, they weren't working because I'm not Wiccan. I'm not British. Wiccan comes from a British background. You know what I'm saying? It's British. It is folk magic from specifically the UK in that line. You know what I'm saying? So it never worked for me. So for a long time, I didn't do spells because I just thought I couldn't do them. And then as I got into more of like my own background, I'm like, wait a minute, let me try this, and so this requires us to deepen our practice by being, in our ancestral veneration and doing DNA. Even if you want to do DNA testing, finding out who your people are, where you're from, what your ethnicity background is, even down to like what tribe you belong to and things like that. That's why this is all important because it's all relevant, right? Um, so this is why we can't just do things on a surface level, because um with the times that we're in, it's requiring us to really, really, really step up and again be impactful. And the only way that we can be impactful is if we are practicing things that work. And the only way for our stuff to work is if we know who we are, we know what we're doing, why we're doing it, and who and what is supporting us spiritually, right? In that same vein, what we do, what we're doing into 2025 needs to be decolonized. Yes, it needs to be decolonized. And because as someone who practices an ATR, I notice that a lot of my skin folk come into these spaces with a colonized attitude. Colonization, being a colonizer, is not just reserved for your skin tone. It's a state of mind. And so when I say that to mean that when we go into these practices, when we're getting into our spirituality, we can't just show up to that space or go to our ancestors, go to our spirit guides, go to these deities and essences that we worship and just expect them to respond to us, expect them to give things to us, do things for us, respond to our petitions just because we're black and we're going to black spirits and the black spirits should respond and do what I say because I'm black, or I have access and rights to this practice just because I'm black. We are able to unlock these practices because of our genealogy, because of our blood, but it's still a relationship that has to be built. It's time that needs to be spent. And there's a lot of patience that needs to come with it, right? And we also have to go into these practices wanting it to be a reciprocal relationship and not just for what we can get from it, because that's also a colonized mind. Colonized way of thinking is exploiting situations, people, resources for gain without any thought to reciprocating or thought to how it affects others, right? So we have to really be decolonized, and our way of doing things when we're in these practices, and really just in general, because I'm gonna tell y'all, the earth spirits, the spirits of this earth, of this nature, of, and it's not just the diaspora, it's globally. They're sick of our shit. They're sick of us disrespecting and mistreating the spaces that we're in. And that's the reason why we're having a lot of natural disasters. That's why we're having a lot of shakeups, right? And these spirits, these energies are demanding that we make things right and we restore balance. And the biggest way to do that is to decolonize how we interact with the world and with the environment around us, okay? And with that being said, what we do as spiritualists needs to be focused on healing and restoration, right? Rebuilding, healing, restoring, pouring into, nurturing, right? Um, that really more than anything, because there's a lot of damage, there's a lot of wounds on so many levels that need to be addressed. And if your spiritual practice is not addressing that, even if you're not doing work for the community, you're only doing work for yourself, your spiritual practice needs to heal yourself, your bloodline, your family. It needs to restore you, it needs to nurture you. And if it's not doing any of that, you either need to rethink the practice that you're in, or the support system within that practice, the people that are supporting you may not be a right fit. Or it may just be the wrong practice overall, or you may need to tweak certain things, or kind of, and again, this goes back into deepening the practice. And because a lot of that has to do with really looking and examining what it is that we're practicing, you know what I'm saying? And really diving deep into what we're doing, why we're doing, and analyzing it. Okay. um it needs to be consistent and treat it like a relationship, right? You can't just go with these practices because you're in an emergency and you're about to be evicted and you need to get money real quick, and you're gonna do a quick spell and give a quick offering, and then you get what you need, and then you don't even acknowledge these spirits, these energies, and your ancestors until the next time you have an emergency, or the next time you need something, right? You need to establish a relationship. It's similar to when you have people who only call you when they have an emergency, when they need something, and then they don't ever hit you up any other time. It's that same energy. Like, when you deal with people like that, do you even want to do anything for them? No, you don't. So spirits, energy, ancestors, they work the same way. You need to be consistent. And honestly, consistency within spirituality, it it cultivates your own discipline, and it provides structure within your spiritual practice. And honestly, it puts you in a really great mindset. Like, when I'm at my altar every day, when I'm tending to my boveda, when I'm giving my ancestors food each week and giving them coffee every day, when I sit and I meditate and I do my prayers and I cleanse myself every day, that does a lot for my mental state. That does a lot for my stability, my spiritual stability. It does a lot for my grounding, right? So it's not just for you, it's not just for your spirits, it's for you as well, when you have that consistency and you build that relationship. And honestly, the more that your spirits see that you are consistent, and the more that they see that you're trying to build that relationship, the more they trust you. And the more they trust you, the more they do for you, the more they reveal to you, right? Another thing that's important as a spiritualist in this year and moving forward is treating your spiritual practice like higher learning. Study. And I'm not saying like read one book and then you're an expert. I'm saying like deep dive, take classes on the subject, read books on the subject, talk to other practitioners on the subject, engage in open dialogue about the subject, learn as much as you can. Like, that's another issue that I have, is that, a lot of spiritualists are superficial and surface level when it comes to just what they learn and they study. So, for example, in Orisha, as a priest, there's a lot that we have to learn, right? But A lot, like prayers, songs, like ceremonies, like specific things, like different taboos and what to do with certain orishas that you can't do with other orishas, and et cetera, right? um what I've been deep diving into has been cooking adimu, or like food offerings for Orisha, right? That's been my current deep dive. So learning what each Orisha eats and how it's to be prepared and how to give it to them, and what to mix with what and what to cook with what and what to do with what, and what some Orishas don't eat and what's taboo for some Orishas and versus others. That's been my current deep dive. And I love that because it's such a niche thing to get into, but you learn a lot about a spirit based off of what they eat, right? So that's just an example of the higher learning, right? Like I've been taking classes, I've been on people's Patreons, I've been learning from other priests, I've been attending more ceremonies and getting hands-on learning, and I'm wanting to be more of a not a jack of all trades, but more of a master of a couple of things, right? I'm doing the same thing with my spiritismo. I am talking more about my with my elders, learning more of the songs of spiritism, learning more of the prayers, working how to work more deeply with certain spirits that come down. um the history of spiritismo in other countries, Cuba versus Puerto Rico versus the United States, African American spiritism versus other groups, because our spiritism is very different. It's rooted in the ring shouts and the Christian church, and the speaking in tongues and the laying of the hands and the Holy Ghost and all of that, like that's very much spiritism, and it's very much specific to African Americans. So learning the history of that, in addition to traditional spiritism in the forms of, the white table and, how it manifested in Puerto Rico and, the Caribbean. When I say deep dive and when I say higher education, that's the type of stuff I'm talking about, right? Um, and lastly, the last thing I want to touch on is to be a spiritualist in 2025 moving forward, we have to be unapologetic and we have to be bold. Especially when we're being faced with a lot of pushback. You have to stand 10 toes down in who you are, where you're coming from, what you practice, and what your message is, what your mission is, right? And not let anyone bully you or try to gaslight you or try to group think you out of what you know to be true in your heart and what your ancestors and spirit guides have told you you're here to do, right? So a lot of the changes that I'm making to my platforms and the messages and the things I'm going to be talking about on social media and in my podcast and on my YouTube channel are centered around this attitude, right? Because I've held back a lot of things that to share, because of just like, oh, I don't want to be seen as the crazy lady, whatever. But it's like, to be a spiritualist, people already think you're crazy. You're crazy until they need you. You're crazy until you give a message that resonates. They're crazy. You're crazy. You're crazy, but then at the deep down the core of it, you're saying things that people know to be true in their heart, even if they don't want to admit it, right? So be unapologetic, be bold in your truth as a spiritualist in whatever capacity it means for you. So that is it for this segment, for this episode. It was a lot. I dropped a lot, so I'm gonna just leave it at that. I'm actually very excited that this is my first message going into the new year, and I'm actually also very excited about this being my first video to relaunch my YouTube channel, right? So I hope that everybody is blessed. I hope I'm very also optimistic about this year, even though it looks crazy, it's going to be crazy. I'm very optimistic. I see a lot of growth. I see a lot of change. I see a lot of prosperity. I see a lot of positive change happening for this year. We just have to be focused and determined and very intentional with how we're moving as spiritualists, as members of our community, as humans. But yeah, that is the message. I For those of you who follow me, I am out of my hiatus. So a lot of my downloads have also included new classes, new events, and new products and things, new conjure oils and new things that I'm, slowly making and launching on the website and in my store. So, for those of you who've been waiting for me to open my books so you can get readings, my books are open. You can now book, okay? BeTheVibe.com. If you're listening on a podcast, whether it's Spotify or Google Podcasts, whatever platform, I always put the description and my website I always put my website on in the description so you can catch that. It's the letter B, thevibe.com. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, my website, all my information is in the description of this episode, so you can catch me there. I am on TikTok until I don't know what's going to happen with TikTok, but I am on Instagram. Water Created a Wonder. That's my handle on Instagram. I am on X. And under Crystal's Sun, and I'm also on Blue Sky under my actual name, which is Latoya Thurman. Blue Sky is an interesting place though, but I decided to dedicate Blue Sky to me listing or chronicling all of my dreams, because y'all, I have wild dreams, very vivid, very lucid, very prophetic. So if anybody wants to just look at my dreams and the things that come in my, if people want to follow that, I post all that on Blue Sky. That's what I've dedicated Blue Sky to. So those are all my handles for those who want to find me. If you're local to Atlanta, I have a Botanica. It's called Simbi's Conjure Shop over in Forest Park. You can Google Simbi's Conjure Shop. It pops up. You can stop by, visit me. And yeah, so I do wish you many blessings. I wish you, prosperity and safety. And I definitely encourage you to, again, deep dive into your spiritual practice. Get with your ancestors, get with your spirit guides, and, be an unapologetic spiritualist. We all came here to do a mission. So let's do our mission and fuck what anybody else has to say about it. All right. So I love and appreciate all of you. Thank you for tuning in. Peace and blessings until next time.